you might have asked a question differently at a particular juncture. Okay. There was some nice laughter between you. I think there was nice energy there. Enzo saying no. There was a lot that you drew out because you stayed in that space for
Yes.
longer. And so I think that set the conversation up really well for Mike to then dive into. Lots of great questions. You're really holding back. I could tell you were thinking about, what's most appropriate to ask next, but you took your time over it. There were some nice pauses, um, and nice, clean sort of questions that you landed. Some of your questions were, what changes if you're less busy? I
Yeah.
think that's something that
Yeah.
you could have dived into a little bit more to help anchor him as to what's valuable to him um, in that. You asked a question, what's behind that perception of your team's ability? I think that was one of the good questions that Enzo actually said.
Yeah.
That's a good question. What's holding you back from delegating? A little bit of stacked questions going on, but absolutely, okay, for where we're at. So yeah, I think you equally did a great job. You checked back on the overwhelm, which came up earlier in the conversation. I think it was really nice that you stayed in that feelings. You asked a few questions around feelings. Um, and uh, I'm just looking through my massive notes. Um, there was something that came through. Enzo was talking about optimism, and that's why it's useful sometimes to lean into their values. So the whole thing, the sense that I got from Enzo is your value of being dependable is really big in this space. And so that might have been something that we could have dived into how important it is to him to come across as dependable and so on. And that did come through later in the conversation. Um, what some of the questions that you asked, I really liked loads of questions. I really liked you picked up on Enzo saying um, about a bad image. And the way that you did that, you just said bad image, and then he filled in the rest of it. And I think that unlocked another piece of the dynamics of the relationships and what he's being mindful of. Um, and it may have been useful at some point to check in on the goals, to say, let's just check in here. The goal for this conversation is for you to have a lighter week next week. And that might have shaped a little bit of where Enzo might have gone with the solution, because what we ended up with were perhaps mid to long term strategies, but we might have had some quick wins that we could have nailed, like what could you do next week? And he did mention like shortening meetings and things like that, and we did get to the qualifying as well. But I thought that was really nice that you picked up on bad image and allowed him to kind of speak into that. So yeah, really nice. Well done, not solutioning. That was good stuff. Um, I like the way you phrased it. If we take that action plan and experiment with it, like what could you do? That was a nice invitation. And then that led Enzo talk about the delegating part, and something really tangible, like you said, that he could have that conversation with members of his team to actually put something in place to shift the weight of things, and then getting better at saying no. So you did summarize and bottom line all the different threads, and that sounds like it was useful for Enzo because he'd forgotten some of the things that were said, and that is part of your job, is to remember these different threads. I would encourage you to try and maybe be more succinct. It's always a challenge, but I
Yes.
heard you say this, this, and this, and then get into the question. But that will come. That will come with practice. I think you kept coming back to the solution. So what kind of a solution could you put in place to better handle that? And that led him to another solution. So that repetition of what could you do and what else could you do and how about this aspect is really important.